My name is Joerg Blumtritt. I'm from Germany, and with me is...
Yeah, well, I'm Majken. Actually, Packer pronounced it fairly well, so thank you. I work with analyzing data, and I'm all about data, and I'm all about math. So I am a special person in some way, slightly socially less skilled, but hey.
So I'm also a mathematician, but our talk is completely without any formulae. So it's kind of the update of our initial talk that we had earlier this year at Strata in London. And we thought we couldn't bring the same slides again because so many things have changed since then. And I mean that absolutely in the sense of the word. So this is kind of the image that kicked everything off. You see what that is. This is two bones. It's a joint. It's a knee. You see patella. And so you often have these kinds of images, and you tend to think these images as of an X-ray, but it is not. It's technically it's a totally different kind of an image. It's called a magnetic resonance image, an MRI. And the difference is that an X-ray would cast a shadow of your bone onto a film. So it's a direct mapping, a direct image, while this image is mediated through software. Someone built algorithms that would interpret the data and calculate the picture from that. And the discussion that took place was between different professions of medical professionals. For example, surgeons. Surgeons would demand from an image like that to, for example, never show a blood vessel too short, so not to accidentally cut it. Whilst a cardiologist might demand never to overestimate the volume of that blood vessel, because she might want to calculate the risk of a stroke. So it's kind of the opposite requests from the software. But the developers at the company building these machines usually don't really document these parameters. You can see it both ways. We as data scientists know that behind that image is data that you can kind of see in the one way or the other. So what we are usually not seeing is these hidden value judgments. It's judgments that someone made on our behalf. And well, yeah, the MRI, as I say, that's the initial discussion that started something like 4 or 5 years ago, when people started demanding from software developers to open up the algorithms to show these hidden value judgments, to make at least the practitioners aware that it is not kind of a directly tied image to reality, but calculated a model in a mathematical way.
So these algorithms with MRI, I know I don't know them, and I don't expect you to. So this is an example of value judgment and algorithms that you and I will be facing within, I would say months rather than years, self-driving cars. Of course, there is this classic example of me being in a self-driving car, and I am going to be in an accident. It will happen. I can have the choice. Will I be hit straight on from a huge truck or sideways? I will choose sideways, because I think that will at least open the option for me to survive. Okay, so now my kid's in the car, sitting next to me. I will choose straight on, because I want to take care of my kid. So that's my choice. But how do I tell an algorithm to change the choice? Because of my values. We might have some way of figuring that out. We will put algorithms in the cars that also apply to the law in the country in which they're driving. Fair enough. I buy a self-driving car, and I bring it to UK. It will, of course, obey to the law in UK. But that car should actually use different laws when driving in Germany. Okay, laws, that sounds fairly easy to put in an algorithm. But what about culture? Cultural differences and styles, how do we put that in the algorithms?
And I mean, this is really where the discussion is now. So we have a very, I would say, a very healthy and good discussion in many countries going on, in the US, for example, and also in the European Union. So the regulatory bodies set up commissions, and people figure out how exactly to implement these legal issues. I mean, well, we have left driving in Singapore, as in the UK, we have right driving in continental Europe. That's easy also. It's just a switch or so. But I mean, really the thing, I mean, how aggressively would you expect a car to merge into the flow of the traffic? That's so different from one country to the next. It could even be different from the north part of a country to the south or so. How would you map that? And this is where we would like to leave this discussion that has to do with liabilities and well, the obvious thing with the self-driving car, and suggest some solutions. And might be these solutions is really the thing that we should concentrate on building and developing as data scientists. And these solutions are kind of the taking data representations of our values and use that to teach things that we deal with, who we are and what we want. And actually, that's not too exotic. We have that already. That's the ad preferences from Google. So that's my profile. This is how Google would target their ads to me. So it's not that bad. I mean, if I read through these properties that Google assigns to me, I don't feel offended by that. I mean, well, hygiene and toiletry, that's debatable. Would you have seen these lists of preferences 4 years ago when I was still working for a large ad agency? That would have looked totally differently. One of my major clients was a lingerie company, and the product line was especially targeted for little girls. Well, Google did still see me as a mid-aged man and being interested in lingerie for little girls. And that was weird. Fortunately enough, you can tick off these things and suggest other interests, but you never know what Google does with that either. But you get the picture. So we have algorithms that are these kinds of representations, and we could just plug our things into that.
See, actually, at one point, I work with spare parts for automotives. So at one point, Google actually thought I was 50-year-old male. Thank you. Well, this Google thing is forcing a view on us. Google looks at us this way. You might be able to tick some of the boxes, but it's a forced view. This is Sarah Watson, who actually lives here in Singapore at the moment, who is writing up a story of Internet of Things, how her fridge tells her that because she's pregnant, she may not open the fridge and get beer, because pregnant people are not allowed to drink beer. And her grocery store that sends a basket with grocery, everyday grocery, to her every couple of times a week, suddenly adds orange juice, because everyone knows that pregnant woman likes orange juice, right? And in her TV, her smart TV, ads for diapers start to show up. The only thing is, Sarah Watson isn't pregnant. And there's nowhere she can go to say, hey, you got it wrong, I'm not pregnant, give me my beer and cut the orange juice.
And that's kind of the thing, actually, that we want to propose. We need these kinds of interfaces to deal with these algorithmic judgments that we face. I mean, the data that we collect with our quantified self gadgets, our self-tracking, that's a good start. This is my sleeping pattern, obviously not from yesterday, but if I have 6.5 hours, I'm a good sleeper, as you can see. That's jawbone up, obviously. So that's, but it's the physical, the bodily things that we track usually. But that's not the only thing that we could track. There's abstractions of our more cultural or economic life, like Majken's account, where she spends her money for. And that's pretty close what we need. So it kind of tracks what we do. It tracks the actions and kind of surveys us and reflects back an image of ours. And with this image, like the targeting companies, like Google, we could calculate who we are or who we would like to be represented towards others. And that's kind of the 3 ingredients for that. So we have training data. That's the most important thing. So we have to collect data, how we act, so that the machine can learn who we are. Then we have the algorithms, so that's some kind of classification and regression algorithm, usually. Could be, for example, decision trees, could be neural networks, well, if you like that. Could be nearest neighbor, a very straightforward thing. You could just see who is like me and then see what people that are like me in the respect of some distance metrics would have acted and then extrapolate from that. That usually works pretty well, actually, can say. And that's what I'm telling now is the third ingredient. It's kind of the initial conditions. It's the boundary conditions. It's the initial distribution that you would expect. So, and that's really the tricky part because that's always built in these kinds of probabilistic machines, and it's the least obvious of these 3, I would say.
So this is a representation, a digital representation of Joerg. This is a way of actually picturing the algorithmic me. This is Joerg. This is your second ego.
And obviously, this is kind of an abstraction. I mean, it's not
no,
really
it's
me.
You actually look like that.
Yeah, I have numbers all over my face.
Yeah.
That's a shitty software producing patterns for cross-stitching, that we found on the net earlier this day.
Yeah, we are happy to bring cross-stitch to a tech.
Yeah, but what it shows you is kind of like Google's ad preferences. This not really is exactly me. It's a rather, I would say, more or less good or accurate picture of myself.
And this is another way of having a picture of me. Of course, we're not going to look at cross-stitch pictures of each other's algorithmic me, but we have had the who am I for ages and even longer, right? So we could just type in who am I, and a computer would tell me who are you, your name, the date, maybe even your privileges at this server where you ask the question. So we have to build this API that actually returns your values. So if you ask me a question, I will answer, but I'm not there, or it's trivial, or it's obvious, or I do not have the time because there's so many questions one could ask. So my digital me will answer instead. It will take over some of all the trivial work. So you just ask my API, and it will tell you the answer. I mean, so I'm in control here.
And that's the interesting thing about targeting again. It's like the API that, the data collected from the websites that I serve, from the YouTube videos that I use, and deriving my interests from that, which usually is not that bad, as you have seen. And why not open that up? Why not give that really an API so that I could use that for other things? I mean, it's interesting what Google says. I would like to have that, like the YouTube recommendations. Yeah, and then we could use these data, and that's the next thing that I would wish we would have, like a public tender asking for our purchases. So I don't want to buy toothpaste or toilet paper or so, even if Google targeted me that way. I would really appreciate an algorithm doing that on my behalf. And why not have an algorithm just announcing that I would need toiletry now and ask for the best bids? We have that in public procurement. I mean, this is European Union procurement from Denmark. It's Majken's example. A municipality asking for bids for stockings. It's Strumpen. And we could do exactly the same thing with our algorithms, and the algorithms would just sign the deal in our behalf. And it's not far off, I would say.
That should be one of the easy take-homes, actually, from having an algorithmic me. One of the challenges could be the fact that this is me, or actually Joerg, trying to get to work. Yeah. Yeah, trying to get to work. And some days he will feel this commute. I need to get to work or whatever. And I'm in a state of mind that says, I just need to get there, okay? Fast, without traffic jam, I just need to get there. So, dear algorithm, that's how I want life to be right now. Then we put kids in the car and stroll around and want to see trees and buildings and fun places. So I still want to go from this one place, home, to the same place, but now I'm on a Sunday trip. And if I only do that on Sunday, it's easy for an algorithm to understand, but maybe it's Thursday, but I want this feeling of Sunday. So I want the choice in order to actually control this digital me, this algorithm me, the choice of how do I feel.
And as we see, we are almost there yet, because this is a real picture by Google Maps, and you see that Google already suggests different paths, different routes through Munich to my office there. And actually, I usually would take the detour thing, because that's much calmer. The other is the pedestrian zone, so that's very accurate. And
so maybe the map will suggest that you need to be more calm, so you need to take the detour today.
Yes, and I mean, some software companies would solve it that way, that I would get into my self-driving car, and then an assistant would pop up, and I would have to click through, I don't know, 20 questions in a kind of survey interface.
How are you feeling today?
Yes, and of course, no one wants to do that. Still, there must be some easy way to suggest different routes and abstractions for that. So I said, well, yeah, the left one could be the well-suited today, no matter what traffic and no matter what day in the week that is. And as I say, I mean, it's already there. It's just not really controllable. It's not that I can teach Google Maps. It's just it's the guys in Mountain View that make these decisions for me, and I really don't see how they did it. It's like the MRI people that built this black box, and I want access for that, and I want an easy way to access algorithms like that for everyone. So it should not be a nerd thing. It should be an easy thing that we train these algorithms for ourselves. And yeah, some companies are already experimenting with that. Netflix is a very good example. It's the poster book example, actually, for recommendation engines. So you have a very good documentation also. So there's very open discussion how they do it. And the interesting thing is that Netflix is really aware of how important, for example, social context is for your decisions. So we don't make decisions just on our own. We are influenced by those near to us, like our family or our friends or our neighbors or so. Society influences our decisions. And that's also an interesting thing, because we should be able to weigh that. We should be able to say, I would really like to act in a way like the Strata community does. Maybe just to learn how the Strata community acts in the first place. And then get orientation from there. You can do that with market research, but it's usually not that good because you smooth out any interesting deviations, and it's very cumbersome.
See, the thing is that I could be interested in sort of tapping into that social life of for instance, Strata, Hadoop, saying, what do interest you guys? And should that influence me? But I'm influenced by something less out there. I've got 2 kids. And sometimes they forget in Netflix to actually choose who's watching the TV. So whatever I want to see is suddenly influenced by a cartoon for a 6-year-old. That's pretty annoying. And there's nowhere for me to go to say, I don't want you to suggest these stupid Japanese movies for me anymore. Or I might have even taken a suggestion to watch a movie by a sort of colleague, friendly, maybe, I don't know. After watching the movie, I was like, that sucked. And still Netflix will say, oh, you watched the movie? There's one more. No, thank you, it sucked. But there's nowhere for me to go to actually tell Netflix that it's wrong. So I want the choice. I want to be able to control the algorithm that's behind. Or the algorithm, being Netflix, could just ask my API, ask my algorithmicMe, saying, OK, I get this cartoon. Is that an outlier? Oh, definitely not interested in cartoons, right? And throw away that piece of data. Another way of dealing with the world, interacting, is Google's way of actually trying to guess how to answer your email. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to offload into some sort of a digital me, algorithmic me, saying, OK, this mail looks sort of boring. I can suggest 3 answers for you, and you get to choose which of these 3 you actually send. OK, that might work for a social skilled person like Joerg. Mine would be more like, I'm feeling shitty today. So, I don't know, sit in front of my computer, scan my eyes, feel my blood pressure. And the question is, should Gmail, should Google then actually try to say, oh, you're in a bad mood. So I will suggest in a bad mood answers, right? Because that's where I am right now. Or should Google save me? I know you're in a bad mood, but let's keep the tone nice and polite. Tomorrow you will thank me.
I mean, imagine how freeing it would be for all these trolls on Twitter. Just switching that on and having spammed everyone with their grumpy replies. So, and now we are leaving Earth. Now it gets really, I would say, yeah. And this is actually, if you type in target group into Google's image search, you get images like that. And actually, that is how marketing people, how we tend to see human beings. It's like I would say it's an anonymous mass of people. Well, a target, well, you shoot at, it's martial language actually that we use in marketing very often. The campaign, you know, we have campaigns like in war. And the interesting thing for me, there's one thing that big data really changed in my working as a social researcher. And that is that it became kind of obvious that people are not that way. And so that's the single one thing that if people would ask me what I've learned in these years with dealing with data, that's the thing. That even if superficially viewed, people might seem like a mass, you see how very distinct one is from the other if you go to the details. So if we want to be really good marketeers, and good salespeople usually don't work like that, we would never aggregate people into sets. And that's really a change. I mean, what we are seeing here is the very old Western paradigm of representation. So it comes from a time where people living together in one village would be regarded as having more or less the same fate. famine would hit them at the same time. A war would hit them at the same time. So it would be sufficient to just take one of these villagers and send him to parliament. So that's representation, because you would have a meaningful aggregate. You would have a set of people that would be seen as homogeneous enough to be represented by one specimen. You could do that the same way, saying, well, as a market researcher, I take a sample of 2,000 women. And then I take like 200 of them that might be women 20 to 39 or something like that. That's how we do market research. That's how we do marketing, actually. And we would take these 200 women, build the mean of their properties, and all other women would be generalized as being like them. And this is exactly how you now see things are not really in the world we live in. And then that's really a change. And the algorithmic representation of ourselves shows that. If it is done well, if a recommendation engine, a search engine, a targeting engine is done well, we don't see people represented as aggregated. We see each one represented or presented, to take Alain Badiou's word, presented as themselves. And we could use that for democracy also. I mean, we have these kind of aggregates also in democracies, in the constituencies. I already mentioned that, the village, the constituency that sends one member of parliament. You also have that in the party program. So it's one-size-fits-all Conservative Party program. It's one-size-fits-all Labour Party program, or Green, or whatever party that is. And in, I would say, ancient times, like 150 years ago, I mean, being, for example, a worker would really define who you are in terms of the policies you would support. So that made sense. But after, I would say, at least after the 1980s or so, that really has changed. And we can see it now. We can see that this no longer fits. And our algorithmic representation might be a solution to scale, because you can't scale grassroots democracy. Grassroots democracy is very demanding. You have everybody always having to decide for every policy that's on the table. That's not feasible. You can't even do that in small villages like we have in Switzerland. Some things have to be decided by a city council anyway or so. So if we want a non-representative way of doing policies, of doing politics actually, we could try using algorithmic representation to kind of bulk suggest policies that we would support. And that need not be party programs. It could be very granular single decisions that we would tick off one by one. There are some downsides, some problems that we have to solve. Probleme is a very good German word. It's like we think in Problemen, the Angst word, but these are the downsides of that. These algorithms tend to, I don't know, if you have some kind of social orientation, as mentioned earlier, we will get a snowball effect like majorities for some decisions. We made simulations, agent-based simulation models, and that was one of the outcomes. And in general, a democracy or a society, not even non-democratic societies, don't work by just doing majority representation. So it's no majority can always overrule minorities. We know that. We need some kind of minority protection. We need to represent a multitude of opinions in every social system. Second is these positive feedback loops. I might see the effect of my voting together with others, and that's kind of jumping the bandwagon. That's also seen in simulations. It's very strong. So if you have some kind of orientation and the possibility to orient to your neighbors is really, it's the confirmation trap. Well, they vote that way, I would also go for that policy. And third, it's, well, your data is always lagging behind. I mean, your data is your past yourself. How could it represent changes of your opinion? I mean, you might think, well, last election, I don't know, I was an angry, disappointed employee, but now I'm self-employed and really self-confident. I might change that would not necessarily be mapped into the data. So these are really three things we should take care of. And there's a fourth one.
See, the thing is that the data is lagging behind. It is the old me. That we have to take care of in some way. Another thing we have to take care of is also the possibility that the algorithm of me is slightly off. Maybe just a little bit. But it could be in trivial questions like buying grocery stuff. No, I really do not like orange juice. You keep buying it and I keep throwing it out. And you think that I actually drink it because I keep throwing it out. So it disappears from the cupboard, right? It can be my movie preferences. That algorithm detects one shift, but I'm sort of just want to just right back where it was earlier. So I have to actually give my algorithmic me feedback. I have to adjust it. Maybe just a little bit, but I have to be able to deliver the feedback that in the early examples we were sort of lacking these skills. Where do I go to say that that's wrong, that's wrong? Now I just adjust my algorithmic me, and whenever you approach the API, it will tell you the new version of, or the more current version of who I am.
And that sounds like pretty much not really gaining anything because you are constantly readjusting the algorithm so you could do the things yourself. Well, and we have a solution for that also. That was a very nice design fiction article in TechCrunch earlier this year. Jarno Kuponen, the designer, and he said, well, that's really difficult, so let's build algorithms for that purpose. So we would have a meta-algorithmic self-representation that would take care for that, and maybe a third, a fourth or so level, and that might approach some limit and come to a rest then.
Well, the sky's the limit, and for angels, they go even further.
Yes, and I mean that's the kind of the conclusion. It's kind of a narrative that we told you. I mean, some things are there already, most is not. I mean, there's hardly any city in the world that's far advanced in terms of planning for the smart city or being a smart run city, or however that is called, whatever it's called. And really many of these questions occur not necessarily with smart cities. That's the most obvious example that we find where we should start thinking of algorithm ethics as something that we, no matter what political system as such there is, that it will be really relevant if smart cities will succeed. So if we just paternalize people with our smart city things, not really many things will be gained. It will end up with friction. People will get even less satisfied with administration and things like that. But if we manage to kind of use that to open, to kind of increase the degrees of freedom that we have, that might be really a chance to gain from that and really to get better organized by communities in which we live. And we have a big task to do because we won't end in Singapore. Hopefully, we will see, well, in some years, a system of 10 billion people organized that way. 10 billion people collecting their data all the time with their mobile devices that they will be constantly carrying with them. Won't be smartphone in 10 years, will be something different, but the data will be there. So use it for these things. use it to, I would say, advance from representational paradigms that have been sitting there for 200 years now, experiment with these things, and really build an ethical way of dealing with data science.
See, I think the thing is that we, as users, actually need to ask the questions. Instead of just accepting that Google sort of gives me the wrong answer compared to my temperament, or my fridge ordering orange juice, or my self-driving car driving in a way that I find annoying, we need to actually say, hey, the data is there. It's my data. Ask me for it, and I will deliver. Let's paint the picture of who I really am, instead of all these algorithms being more or less correct or not, or whatever, done by variously skilled people. So by that, we're sort of like ending chapter number 2. We will, of course, be making chapter number 3 at some point.
Yes. Hope to see you soon. Have a good evening. Thanks for listening. It was a great conference, so thanks, O'Reilly, for having us here.
And safe travels home.
Safe travels. Yeah. Thanks. Oh, there's time for questions I wouldn't have dared to ask. Well.
Can you hear me if I
Yes, we can. I would repeat your question for the streaming.
So, I really like this topic in terms of like ethics and algorithms and machines. What I really want to think of is in terms of algorithmic ethics, what sort of inclination we should take, because we have this prescriptive in which what should be our desired outcome, in contrast with descriptive in which derived from our existing patterns, what are certain behaviors,
Yes.
what my behavior is, because sometimes the things that we want to do sometimes conflicts with the things that we actually do when we are in the middle of the situation.
It's a very good question. I mean, it's the question is, to what extent should these algorithms that we have presented here be just descriptions, or should they be normative and obey some I would say super ego-like rule system, and that's really a difficult thing to solve. I mean, policy making and politics is there to kind of translate the common moral into laws.
But in order for this to have value, my algorithmic me, it has to describe me, including my flaws and strange behavior and bad habits in email culture, whatever. Otherwise, it wouldn't be me. It would be some picture we painted that we agreed upon as being socially acceptable, but it wouldn't be me. So whoever asked who I were would still be slightly off if they listen to that.
It could be my desire, but my desire sometimes
Yeah.
translate to.
That's exactly, that's very well put. I mean, the question is, for example, if I live in, for example, in Europe, I might show some kind of social behavior that might offend people in the US. We had discussed that yesterday. For example, in terms of beach fashion, you know.
We didn't discuss that yesterday, I know.
And or there's very different approaches to what's seen as your private life and bringing that in public. So there's many examples of that, and so there is clearly some system that has to kind of give the framework in which my personal algorithm has these degrees of freedom. That could be an emerging set of values from the algorithms nearby. So I mean, the moral, the ethical or philosophical, cultural system that we live in is kind of an aggregate. It has to do with the past, so it's not without history. We could see it as a time series with high autocorrelation and some seasonality, obviously also.
But
And
one could
finding these
actually-
models, I think, that's a mathematical question. And simulations show that it can be done if that's the one of the conditions, if the distribution of preferences in the population is not totally random. So if there is some kind of pattern, some kind of you would translate it in meaning in the distribution of your preferences. You see that such algorithmic representation kind of converge, and you could build sets of ethic. I mean, at least theoretically.
Yeah, but one could even see it as an opportunity to actually adjust oneself. Because if my algorithmic angel, the meta, is sort of saying, okay, you keep on describing yourself like this, but you behave like this. So you're purposely actually putting yourself or the algorithmic me sort of off. Maybe I should guide you and tell you, are you aware that you have this picture of yourself, but you act in a different way? I mean, go see a psychologist. Well, do something about it, or accept who we are, or be aware. Yes, I paint this rosy picture, and I will receive wrong things because of that. Okay, accept that.
We have another question?
First of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Very interesting dimension to our world. And I'm interested, you pictured that algorithmic angel, which is hypothetical. But we are seeing a lot of algorithmic devils that are actually real and with very questionable ethics. I don't know if you can tell us your views on that.
I mean, yeah, that's these kind of meta things that fine-tune, things that affect us. The algorithmic devils, that's kind of the patronalizing things that we experience that force us in one or the other directions. I mean, we have that all the time when using operating systems. That's a very unsuspicious example, but you see that you get nudged in a certain way of doing things. I mean, this is like the Apple way of doing things is very restricted, or it's very paternalistic, and the Linux way is kind of more fluffy or so, and that's again the smart city question. I mean, how would we avoid a smart city or a smart nation even, or smart world become from totally dystopian? So I don't fear authoritarian regimes using that. I mean, they have using surveillance and control mechanisms all the time. So what's really interesting is to see that by using tools like that, you somehow become more visible for others. I mean, we see that with quantified self, we see that with social networks. So our representation at one thing, they become visible to everyone, or at least to our community, which we allow to read our timeline or so. So people clearly get a picture of ours much clearer than in the past. And the second thing is, it's kind of social pressure is there to kind of tell who you are. And the third is that is lagging behind. So while when I was young, it was usually when you left university and moved to some city, you could really start anew. If you messed with your previous life, I would say no one would really remember. That has clearly changed. I mean, try switching.
Facebook remembers for you.
Yeah, well, try switching Facebook profiles or any social network profile. The cost of killing all your thousands of Twitter followers and start anew, it's tremendous. You wouldn't want that. So you are caught in the picture that your data draws, and that will become more and more, I would say, a thing. And we will have that in in all kinds of things that play a major role in our lives. And that will be much more intrusive than any surveillance government could ever be. I'm convinced about that.
Which is why we need to raise awareness.
I mean, the McLuhan phrase of the global village, I mean, you could take that by the word and say, well, yeah, that will be a quite bucolic village. It will be a pre-modern village where everyone is their neighbor's keeper. In a way, you don't need any coercion by the state anymore, maybe, if you have systems like that. So it's the kind of valence, as Stephen Mann calls it. The I veil you, you veil me, and that's the way we control our social lives. Well, no, we have the dystopian thing. Also, I would suggest 4 beers now. Or coffee.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for listening.